I always have a fun time sweeping through the Key Collector Training 20 CBSI Hot 10 and Cover Price Top 10 hot comic book lists every week. Hi, I'm Christopher, aka the Bronze Age Nerd, and this is that show where I look at all those books and pick my top 5 not to buy. So that's how the show works. Now let's actually get to some of the picks. Starting off at number 5, we're going to talk about New Avengers number 4. This is the first appearance of Maria Hill. So go ahead and skip ahead to the number 4 pick if you don't want spoilers for Secret Invasion. I do have to kind of talk about spoilers to talk about this book, but in case you just kept watching and decided to roll the dice, I'll keep it somewhat vague and not go into great details here. The whole point of buying this book would be to say that you believe in Maria Hill spec in the MCU. I don't think that's relevant anymore after her most recent appearances in Secret Invasion. So I'm going to go ahead and say that this is a safe book not to buy for that kind of MCU-related spec. Although at the same time, I have to appreciate it. I mean, it is a booty cover. At number 4 on the list, we have Spider's Shadow number 1. Now, this landed on the list because there is, according to Key Collector, some drummed up interest in dark storylines because of what happened with Ruins recently. And it kind of had a resurgence based on a TikToker talking about it. And this is a well-liked series for sure, and it also is, kind of that darker reinterpretation of an alternate version of the storyline. So this to me falls in the list of, kind of a good read, but it's a cover price book right now, and I don't see this having a significant effect on its long-term value, or more importantly, a significant effect on its mid-term value or medium-term value. Because this will see a bump, because every book that hits the list generally sees some kind of a bump, although not always, but it probably will. And then later on down the road, it receives, maybe if the spec was worthy, it might receive a long-term bump. But usually there's this peak, and then there's a dip. And I would recommend buying the dip on this if you do decide you want to buy it. Although at this point, why not just buy this in a collected edition or trade if you want to read the story? Like I said, it is, a cool story. I recommend doing that if you want to read something like this, but you don't have to go chase down the single issues to do that, so why not read it some other way? At number 3 on the list, we're going to talk about Captain America 750, and this is the Adi Granov variant. This was a 1 in 50 retailer incentive, and this popped up on CBSI's Hot 10, and the Ben's right up on that particular issue said it's been a while since we talked about Adi Granov, and I agree, it's been a while. And that reminded me, Adi Granov really isn't an artist that I think commands a major premium like some of the other big variant artists in the game. And this is a bit of a subjective thing. I'm looking at the cover art for this book, and I don't particularly think it speaks to me. If you're a big Captain America fan or a big patriotic covers fan, I could see where this might hit. I also mentioned in Ben's write-up is that this landed around the 4th of July, which definitely helps it. But it's also kind of a soft selling, his market research had this at $65 to $75 post-launch. For a 1 in 50, that's not crazy, and I really have a feeling that we're going to see this one dive after a while. You probably will have people that do try to chase it down later on, but I don't think it's going to be a large enough number of people to really drive the price up and sustain it for this book. At number 4, this is honestly kind of a different pick for me because I'm not super familiar with this character. This is the Venom 2099 number 1, and is the first appearance of the second Venom 2099. And their name is pronounced Aaliyah Bell, I think. I actually don't know. I'm not familiar with this version of Venom 2099. I'm familiar with the original version that debuted in Spider-Man 2099, like, what is it, issue 25 or whatever. To see this character start to pop, I don't understand this. I feel like there's got to be something going on here that I don't know about, like this character is maybe slated to appear in a solicitation or something like that. But I don't know, this just seems weak. There's, again, I've hated on it for weeks now. I'm sure people are sick of it, but I'm just done with all Spider-related characters until we see, beyond the top 4 or 5 start to really pick up. I'm not really going to be buying into other Spider-related characters. At this point, there's so many that how are you going to be able to know which ones are really going to ever take off, if any of them do? We're still recovering from the shock that is Spider-Boy at this point. So this is that kind of point where I'm going to point out, like, I could be wrong. And here's why I do track these comic books down the road. Follow along for my 6-month and 1 year later follow-ups on books like this, and you can definitely check out how this book is done. Which brings us to the number 1 pick this week, which is Raiders of the Lost Ark number 1, the first appearance of Indiana Jones in comic books. And so I have several reasons why this is going to land on the list this week. The main reason is that the early reports from the Indiana Jones film aren't overwhelmingly positive. Now, from what I understand, I think this is supposed to be Indiana Jones' last ride as Harrison Ford portraying Indiana Jones. And if that's the case, then this character doesn't really have any immediate reason to increase in value. So that brings me to my second point, which is that when you have this kind of like first appearance in comics of a character that's way more popular outside of comic books, it can be a little dicey as far as whether or not there's going to hold value for that particular comic book. There are cases where like some video game characters have crossed over and done really well, but there's also cases where like, video game characters, for example, have crossed over and not done too well. And yet they've had like a lot of successful comic books that did pretty well. Like Tomb Raider's a really good example. That book's not really worth a ton, but she had a lot of comic books that, have hot covers that are sought after. But Lara Croft herself is not necessarily something that people think about. But then again, you do have characters, like the Mario Brothers and that kind of stuff. And that's just video games. When it gets to movies, it gets more interesting. The automatic example would be to jump to Star Wars. And Star Wars is a little bit of a unique case because there's billions of Star Wars comics, right? There's so many Star Wars comics that I think they've established themselves in the comic book world just as much as anywhere else. When you take a property like Indiana Jones or Back to the Future or a few other movies like that where there's really popular films that are beloved, that are from the, the 80s, that kind of thing, but then if you translate to the comic books, they don't really do that well. Another example that I would throw out there is kind of what happened with Dune. And I actually kind of whiffed on that. Like I bought up some stuff from Dune because I thought, well, the new movie's coming out. People might like this. Maybe the comic books will do well. That never really happened. Now I'm still happy I have those comic books because I really love Dune, which is part of why I did that. But if you take that same thought process and you take it over to Indiana Jones, you'll kind of see where I'm going. Now, all that said, and this is my risky pick, I usually save that one for the last one here. And Indiana Jones is a beloved character by a lot of people. But I feel like he's had plenty of time for his comic book to appreciate value based on that love of the character. What's the path forward for this comic book to appreciate anything other than maybe like a slow kind of rise or a slow trickle going forward? I do want to remind everybody, I'm not saying that you shouldn't buy these comic books or you should buy these comic books or anything like that. Personally, I'm not going out and buying Extreme Venomverse 4, for example, the 1 in 25 ratio, but I do think it's a cool cover, and I think that it's an interesting, new characters, and we're going to be seeing those characters around again at some point, so maybe that'll be worth something. So I just wanted to take a second and say, like, why didn't I put that book on the list this week? Because I'm not buying it, so why wouldn't I put it there? Because I understand why people might want to buy it. I think that if it's one of those things where if you believe in characters, if you believe in a cover, any of those kinds of things, feel free to speculate on it. It's your money. You should do it however you want. I'm never going to tell you how to spend your money. I'm never going to tell you how not to spend your money. But I am going to tell you what I think are the 5 worst picks from those lists. That's all this really is. I do think that there's a general rule of thumb that you probably shouldn't buy a comic book that's on those lists because it's probably at the top of its price, the peak of its pricing that it's going to have at least for a while. And that's generally true. But then again, sometimes these books start trending because they are going to be heating up for a long period of time. It's just that that's pretty rare. So I just wanted to talk about that thought process. The other thing that I want to throw out there, and I always mention this, I try to mention this at least, is do not take my advice of like, hey, I'm not going to buy this book for the $20 it's going for online right now, just for example. If you find it for cover price of, $4 or $5 or something, that's a different situation. I'm literally talking about when these lists come out. What is that book selling for, in the short window of time after it appears on these lists? Because we all know people rush to sell some of these books when they appear there. And is it a good buy at that price? That's another important caveat for this list. On your way down to the comments, you will see a member join button, and that is how I have my channel viewers support me, other than just watching the videos, which I definitely appreciate. My channel members are scrolling by on the screen right now, and they are people that help me do all kinds of awesome stuff with this channel, like, for example, pickup services that I subscribe to so that I can get you guys news, information, or different ways that I can stream out to you. And all that money comes from viewers and channel members. So I appreciate their support. And if you want to become a channel member, that button is down below. Until the next video, I just want to remind you, as always, hey, 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 hey. Read comics every day.